A Visit to Shantytown from Recognizing Blues by Herman Bosman. Situated on the slope of a hill 10 miles outside the city of Johannesburg was a township whose expanding dimensions would soon entitle it to the prestige of being termed a city also. At present, it was known as Shantytown. Shantytown contained several thousand shacks, each consisting of a rough framework of poles covered with sacking and each housing a black family. Here let it be explained that our visit took place in bright sunshine. It was a pleasant morning and, as far as the writer was concerned, the visit was not made in any spirit of sociological crusading, which seems to demand of the individual a preconceived righteous indignation against the existing economic order, so that whatever is experienced and observed gets fitted into appropriate and ready-made emotions. Consequently, where this picture of actual conditions in Shantytown may appear to fall short, will be in respect of its deliberate avoidance of the obvious. Stories of squalor told with a consistent drabness in grey shadows unrelieved by the light of imagination tend, in their ultimates, to pall. The heart gets tired of the same old note struck over and over again. It is not in the human nature for one's feelings to be kept at the same pitch of human intensity, whether the feelings are of pity or of righteous wrath all the time. There is such a thing as tedium, and if it is not polite to yawn at a platitude, it is, at all events, natural. For this reason, this article will be confined to an objective description of an interesting little town, healthfully situated on a hillside, and it will be left to the reader to make his own comments, such as dastardly or delightful, depending alike on his own subjective reactions and his capacity for reading between the lines. What first struck the writer, who has considerable practical knowledge of constructive engineering, was that two distinct types of building material were employed in the erection of the shanties. Most of the residential abodes were covered with mealie sacks. A few, and these belongings obviously to the more aristocratic section, had their walls and roofs constructed of sugar pockets, bearing the trademark of Messrs. Hewlett. Close examination showed that the Hessian in a sugar pocket was of finer texture and better woven than that in a mealie bag, and that it was consequently a superior building material. It kept out the elements better. Each shack was numbered in some dark-coloured paint. These numbers ran into the thousands, thereby affording a rough and ready means of computing the population of the place. It also made it easier for the postman on his rounds to deliver correspondence and newspapers. One does not imagine that the residents of Shantytown were much troubled with tradesmen's circulars however. Although an enterprising house agent could, if he so desired, have struck an incongruous note by circularizing the area with printed literature about "Why pay rent? Let us show you how to build your own house." There was little about these Hessian-covered shacks that was in conflict with the fundamental laws of architecture, which are that a building should be planned in accordance with the purpose for which it is required, that it should carry no ornamentation that is outside of this purpose, and that its design should be guided by the type of material that is employed. From an aesthetic point of view, the architecture of Shantytown could therefore be described as not undignified. About none of these shacks was there that false attempt at drama that made Park Station such an eyesore. And when a black woman told us that she was suffering from chest pains as a result of her hut having been drenched during the recent rains, and that most of the people there were suffering from various illnesses contracted through sleeping under soaked blankets, her complaints were not based on artistic grounds, but on a simple scientific fact that sacking is porous and lets in the water in the rainy season. But from the point of view of pure architecture, there was not much wrong with these dwellings. The washed-out yellows of the Hessian roofs and walls blended prettily with the grass of the South African veld in midwinter. Washed-out yellow against bleached fawn. Pretty. And felt-coloured huts built close to the soil seemed much more appropriate for South African conditions than skyscrapers and blocks of flats. The shacks in the main street of Shantytown seemed to express the true spirit of Africa in a way that the buildings of Elof Street did not. But all of these things are merely by the way. For that matter, one feels that if a number of Kalahari Bushmen were brought to Johannesburg on a visit to a fashionable block of city flats, they would go back to the desert with strong feelings about the white man's degradation. Living in an anthill, they would say, squalor, unhygienic, like pigs. And you ought to see some of those pictures they hang on their walls. Just too awful. What was most interesting about Shantytown was the human side. One felt in place the warmth of a strong and raw life. Deplorable though the economic circumstances were, there was about these men and women and children a sense of life that had no frustration in it. A dark vitality of the soil, an organic power for living that one imagined nothing in this world could take away. Was there anything about us, about this party of white visitors, that the residents of Shantytown could genuinely envy? In our hearts, the answer was no. The replies that the blacks returned to our questions were prideful. Their attitude was a lesson in breeding. They resented our presence in the way that any proud person resents the intrusion into his affairs of curiosity or patronage. And they received us with that politeness that shames. We wanted to know what had happened to Mapanza, the headman who had fought against the humiliating introduction of soup kitchens, and they informed us with grave dignity that he was not there. Everybody knew what we subsequently learned from a policeman, that Mapanza was in jail. Whatever information we received, we obtained from the policeman, from the side of the authorities, not from the side of the residents. And when we left, a black woman asked us if we were going to send blankets. It was the perfect snub, whose imputation could not be lost, even on the most obtuse. A duchess could not have administered it better. Whatever ill effects detribalization may have had on the black people, it had done nothing, judging from what was happening in Shantytown, to the stateliness of the aristocracy. Living under what were nothing less than ghastly conditions, deprived apparently of even the barest necessities of human existence, the inhabitants of Shantytown displayed, in the face of adversity, a sublime courage that went far beyond questions of economics or sociology. If life is spirit, what the black people of Shantytown had about them was not poverty, but destiny.